Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 8th of June, 2022, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by Debi Evans. It's nearly halfway through the month.
It is nearly. So we should get straight on with the clown show, which of course is Boris. And there he was yesterday, welcoming the cabinet and telling them all what a great day it was. The day that Monday had been a fantastic day. It was a good work that was done in order to get the vote through. 211 MPs voted for him and 148 voted against him. And that's somewhat worse than Theresa May's confidence vote, which was in December 2018, of course, and she was gone 6 months afterwards. So the question is, how long can he stick it out? It is a clown show, it's a charade, but there's clearly moves afoot to replace him in some way. So who could it be? Could it be the lovely Liz? This is the question. And where would we be, Brian, if Boris was replaced by Liz? Would we be in a better position?
No, I'm going to shock our audience by saying I think we'd be in a worse position because this lady has demonstrated that she's unbelievably callous and calculating, calling for young people to go to Ukraine to fight. She wants the war with Ukraine. So what is in Liz Truss's head? Nothing to do with bettering the state of this nation. She wants perpetual war.
Well, Debi, we could welcome you in at this point and say that the other person who may be front running this campaign is Jeremy Hunt, of course.
Oh dear. Well, where do I start, Mike? Jeremy Hunt. I mean, I think there's plots going on ahead. Apparently, Boris is being urged to make him Chancellor of the Exchequer in his next reshuffle. But, Jeremy Hunt, Nadine Doris had a proper attack on him over Twitter and actually admitted that whilst on his watch, the NHS was in collapse back then. And I can tell everybody today that the NHS is in complete and utter collapse today. And he even said, I doubt the NHS would want me back. Well, the country doesn't want him back. And I'll have to call him Jeremy because I don't want to make a slip up. But, the WEF want Jeremy Hunt as leader of this country. The WHO want Jeremy Hunt. And he's just Keir Starmer in a blue tie, as far as I'm concerned. So haven't got much good to say about Jeremy Hunt, especially as he's not replied to me.
Yes, brilliant. I think that sums it up pretty well. But look, it doesn't end there because the moves are afoot to change the rules within the Tory party because supposedly Boris is safe now for a year from another confidence vote, but they want to reduce that to 6 months. Well, some of his mates seem to be coming out of the woodwork to try to support that. But what's the press saying? Well, today, cut taxes. That's how he stays in power. If he cuts taxes, that'll make everybody in the Tory party happy, and he will remain as leader. Sorry, just before you come, I just wanted to show this because it's right across the press. So this is the BBC. The Times, Boris told to cut taxes if he wants to survive. The Times even did an op-ed on this, the Times view on Boris Johnson's future, and they're talking about cutting taxes. So the Murdoch press absolutely on for cutting taxes. Here's the Sun. Boris Johnson will thwart the Tony Remainer rebels if he slashes taxes. So it's all about tax cuts, all while government spending goes through the roof. How could it possibly go wrong, Brian?
Well, it's already gone wrong, but it's just going to get worse. So of course, fuel prices rocketing, so £2 a litre on the motorway for everybody to see. Inflation increasing, but don't worry about any of that because allegedly he's going to cut taxes. So the scam continues.
Yes.
Well, let's switch to another scam agency, which of course is the BBC. We've been watching their reporting on Ukraine very carefully. Well, of course, the Jubilee weekend is over, so the BBC is back on track with the Ukraine. But we thought we'd just have a little look at how they're dealing with things at the moment. So although the link through to this page that you've got on screen is quite small. Once you open up the Ukrainian live page, of course, it's big banner headlines, lots of graphics and exciting scan throughs. But we just thought we'd pick up on this, and we were interested in the first article, new details about US weapons sent to Ukraine. And let's have a look at the comment on this. Now, I'm going to say straight away, did you actually spot the BBC lie Here's the text. New details have been released of the total amount of US weapons and equipment sent to Ukraine since the conflict started on 24 February. More than $4 billion worth of military hardware has been given to Ukraine, and much of it is now in the country. The US is by far the biggest contributor. Well, this is the lie, because of course this equipment has not been given to Ukraine. Most of it has been pushed through on a lend-lease agreement. So bankrupt Ukraine is fully bankrupt now because the US is covering costs of public servants and the Ukrainian government. But that bankrupt Ukraine is still going to be expected to pay back the equipment that it's been given. So the BBC utterly lying in its setting out of this, because by leaving this vital fact out, you're painting a completely different picture as to what's going on in Ukraine. So I thought that was worth highlighting. But that little section from the BBC goes on to this, because it says donated weapons include. So let's have a look. 6,500 Javelin anti-tank missiles, 20,000 light anti-armor weapons, 1,400 Stingers, 108 M777 howitzers with 220,000 shells, 4 HIMARS, 121 Phoenix Ghost and 700 Switchblade drones, 200 armored anti-personnel carriers, several hundred Humvee vehicles, 20 Soviet-made, that should be Mi-17 Helos, that's a BBC error, 7,200 firearms with 50 million rounds, and 3 counter-battery radar systems. But if we analyse this, we get a very different picture from what the public will probably pick up from the BBC reporting, because the Javelins, despite the sheer number pumped into Ukraine, have not performed well. And in any case, the Russians aren't running a battle allowing these things to be used as the West thought they would. Many of them are old and have not functioned properly. We've got the 20,000 light anti-armor weapons. These are showing little effect on the battlefield simply because the Russians are not again playing the battle that the West and NATO anticipated, so they're not putting much of their armor in the way of these light weapons. The Stingers have been poor performers, contrary to all the hype pushed in. In any case, there's little battlefield effect because the Russian Air Force is not flying the sorts of attack patterns that these Stingers are designed to deal with, so there is no use for them at the moment. The howitzers, well, too little, too late, and all of the qualified military commentators, my background is Navy, so I'm being very careful here, but people who are fully qualified in combat in the Army system are saying too little, too late. Many of them already destroyed. They're not going to change the battle. The HIMARS systems, well, the same thing applies. It's a handful of systems. This is not going to make any difference. But the BBC, of course, doesn't say that even the Americans weren't brave enough to give the Ukrainians the long-range systems because they were too worried that a pretty mad Ukrainian government system would be firing these deep into Russia. More drones, well, they're not going to work because at the moment the losses of drones on a daily basis are somewhere around 10 to 15. So in a few weeks, these drones will also be gone, and that is due to the quality of the Russian air defense system. The light anti-personnel carriers are really irrelevant because Ukraine can't reposition due to Russian air superiority. Same applies to the Humvees. This is a little bit of stuffing and nonsense. The helicopters, which are designed to carry cargo, are too few, too late, and their chances of surviving in the war environment at present are low. The small arms are not going to make any difference to the progress of the war because Russia is largely killing Ukrainian soldiers by shelling, and the small arms are going to make no difference to that. And the counter-battery radars, the same thing, too little, too late. So when we do a more detailed analysis on what the BBC is saying, this is really hype, but one thing it's going to do is clearly cause the deaths of tens of thousands more Ukrainians. So we'll finish off the comment on the section because at the bottom here it says Kiev has repeatedly asked for more weapons to fight off attacks by Moscow, attacks which are being better supplied given their close proximity to Russia's border. Well, we just put a note in there to say, didn't the BBC say that Russia's logistics were hopeless and failing? Well, apparently not. So the line is changing. But what we do know is Ukraine's a bottomless pit now for Western weapons, and the movement to the fighting means it really doesn't matter how much more of these weapons the West pushes in, they're going to end up destroyed as the Russians move forward. But on social media, a lot of very positive reporting of what the Ukrainians are up to. I'm just putting this on screen, but the message constantly put across by Ukraine is that they're moving forward, when the reality of all the reports on the battlefield is that that is clearly not happening. So where does Alinsky stand with this? Well, of course, this man is not really declaring the truth of the matter. So let's condense it down to the most simple facts we can. The area of Ukraine is approximately 233,062 square miles. Russian-controlled territory is 20% of that, and Zelensky is happy to declare that. That comes out at 46,612 square miles. The size of England is 50,337 square miles. So we can see that the Russians have virtually taken territory the size of England, and they've done that in just 100 days, using minimal forces for this type of battlefield and causing minimal civilian casualties. Now, people might think that last comment is very hard to understand, but if you look at the way the West has conducted wars with very vicious carpet bombing of anybody on the ground, what Russia is doing is very calculated. And the Russians have achieved all this in 100 days against widespread, layered, prepared, dug-in Ukrainian defences, with often what are described as suicidal defenders, because rather than surrender, they are fighting to the death. But of course, it isn't Russia just fighting Ukraine, because Ukraine is fully backed by the US, UK, and NATO forces. That includes special forces on the ground, plus all of the intelligence capability, command and control, drones and weapons. So there we are. In 100 days, Russia has effectively taken a country the size of England, but the BBC doesn't want to talk about this. So let's just bring in Zelensky here and remind people of what this man is about. Here we are, selected by the US, UK, sold to the EU, groomed to fight until the last Ukrainian. And of course, the propaganda machine that he's using in Ukraine was trained by the BBC's own BBC Media Action charity. And what is he saying at the moment? We will win when the last remaining Ukrainian dies. And clearly he doesn't care whether that's in the millions or not. And I'll just add this one in here because, of course, we've been hearing Slava Ukraini. But yesterday, as I drove in the car, Radio 4 was delighted to tell me that, of course, it was now Slava Boris Johnson because Zelensky was saying, oh, he's a great ally. I'm so pleased that he's still Prime Minister. But we're going to say, of course, it was Boris Johnson who was the man telling Zelensky that peace was not an option and he should continue to fight on.
You had a little bit of video?
Well, we did. We'll just play that just to... There's our report and our analysis on what's happening in Ukraine. This is how the BBC sells Zelensky at the moment.
У нас складна ситуація на Сході, ситуація на Сєвєродонецьку, ви знаєте, ми тримаємо ситуацію. Саме тримаємо ситуацію. Їх більше. Вони потужніші, але тим не менш, я думаю, що у нас є всі шанси боротися в цьому напрямку. 10% населення там є. 10-15% населення там залишилось. Те, що ми розуміємо. Да? А, Тим не менш, в Лисичанську приблизно така сама ситуація, хоча коли ти їдеш по Лисичанську, відчуття, що там нікого немає. Це також я вам кажу, я навіть не знаю, де вони, їх немає. На вулицях немає людей, окрім наших військових, і де-не-де з'явиться одна там якась людинка. Ну так, не бачу, людей немає. Ось таке є відчуття.
So we left the original soundtrack in there because it gives you a feel of the style of delivery. But what does Zelensky say? Well, we're having a bit of trouble in the Donbass, but we think we can succeed on that axis. And is this true? No, of course it's not, because at the moment the Russians continue to move forward and will do so. So this is not true. But I was fascinated, Mike, when he says that people have disappeared and he's no idea where they've gone.
Yeah.
They just, one day they were there, the next day they've just gone.
Yeah.
Of course, who is there in those positions? Ukrainian troops. And one of the reasons that a lot of those people have gone in the Donbass is because the Ukrainian troops have been bombarding them for years. So BBC not telling the truth, I think.
Well, Brian has just given an update on what's going on in the war. Well, General Sir Richard Barnes was giving an update this morning on mainstream press. Let's just have a look and see what he had to say, and then we can laugh at it afterwards.
Okay, Russian Defense Minister saying that Russia has now liberated 97% of the Luhansk region. First of all, do you think that can be true? And secondly, if that is the case, does that then lend itself to the argument that you just put forward, which means that there could be a pause?
So I think we're at a very telling point now. Russia occupies about 20% of Ukraine and 97% of Luhansk and close on at least 85% of the Donbass region as a whole. And the absolute key question is, when Russia feels that it has gone as far in the Donbass as it needs to go, and it is fighting this brutal, grinding battle, expending vast amounts of ammunition and casualties to get there. Has it run out of steam, or does it simply decide to pause before coming back elsewhere this year? And we won't know the answer to that for some time. On balance, it looks like in the Donbass, they're running out of steam.
So General Sir Richard Barron's claim is that Russia has run out of steam. Brian, that is a laughable statement. But aside from anything else, in order to get a view of how much credibility you should give this man, we should remember that he is best buddies with Chris Donnelly of the Institute for Statecraft and obviously the Integrity Initiative, and that organisation funded by the British Foreign Commonwealth the Foreign Commonwealth Office at the time was pushing disinformation against Russia, anti-Russian disinformation for years through the British mainstream press, with the full cooperation of the British mainstream press as well. So we've got to listen to what he says for sure, but then we've got to put it in the context of what he is.
And what the real message that he wants to get across. And of course, the message he's putting across is the Russians are incompetent, they can't really fight this war, they're losing. But the reality is we do not have, just to give one angle to this, we do not have any senior British military officers with any experience on the battlefield of fighting the type of war which Russia and Ukraine are having to fight. So it's a completely disingenuous commentary, but to suggest that they have no idea whether the Russians are going to continue to move forward is utterly laughable, because the Russian tactics haven't changed on the battlefield for the last couple of months, and that is they continue to take ground, they then have a pause, they reposition, and then they move forward, and they're adopting the slow, steady style they are in order to counter, in many cases, the help which the US, UK, EU and NATO have been giving to the Ukrainian side. So I find his comment utterly crass, and it would be really wonderful to question that man on what evidence he's got for making these particular claims.
Now, Monday, Charles Michel, the president of the European Council, one of the three EU presidents, because the EU needs three presidents, was speaking at the UN Security Council. Well, was he speaking or was he lying? Let's have a look at the first clip here of what he had to say.
The Kremlin is using food supplies as a stealth missile against developing countries. The dramatic consequences of Russia's war are spilling over across the globe, and this is driving up food prices, pushing people into poverty and destabilizing entire regions. And Russia is solely responsible for this food crisis, Russia alone, despite the Kremlin's campaign of lies and disinformation. I've seen it with my own eyes a few weeks ago in Odessa. Millions of tons of grain and wheat stuck in containers and ships because of Russian warships in the Black Sea and because of Russia's attack on transport infrastructure. And it is Russian tanks, Russian bombs and mines that are preventing Ukraine from planting and harvesting. The Kremlin is also targeting grain storages and stealing grain in Ukraine while shifting the blame on others. This is cowardly, this is propaganda, pure and simple propaganda.
I mean, I just found that utterly despicable, pack of lies. And as a result of what he said there, the Russian ambassador walked out, which leads us into the second part of this. Let's have a listen.
Let's get to the facts. The EU has no sanctions on the agricultural sector in Russia, zero. And even our sanctions on the Russian transport sector do not go beyond our EU borders. You may leave the room. Maybe it's easier not to listen to the truth, the ambassador. They do not prevent Russian flag vessels, our sanctions, from carrying grain, food, or fertilizers to developing countries. The EU, on the contrary, is doing all we can to help Ukraine's agricultural exports and to support Ukraine's agricultural sector for the coming season.
So no mention of the fact that the ports, the Black Sea is mined by the Ukrainians, that their ships sunk as a hazard to navigation in the Black Sea, and that they're doing nothing to shift that stuff. But that then, his sentiments there echoed this morning by the lovely Ursula von der Leyen, who tweeted this out: the Russian invasion of Ukraine reverberates around the world, affecting the lives of millions, threatening in particular food security worldwide. Our response must be clear and determined. She lied. Well, let's just have a look at Bloomberg from, though this is the 14th of April, and nothing has changed since then. Russian grain still flows to top customers despite war inflating costs, is the headline. Several weeks after the invasion of Ukraine, Russia is still exporting grain to some of its biggest customers, even as shipping costs soar. And they provide a handy graph showing that was for the month of April alone. 40 million tons is Russia's expected export for this current season. And as you can see, they're exporting a huge amount to Turkey, to Egypt, to Iran, Algeria, Sudan, and China. They're the top five. So is Charles Michel just lying through his teeth?
Yes, he is.
Yes.
It's propaganda. He's lying in order to put out propaganda of what the true situation is. No
Okay.
question of it.
Okay, well, it got worse. So let's listen to the next clip.
Women, peace, security. This is a critical and timely subject. 2 years ago, Secretary General Guterres called to end violence, both on the battlefield and in homes. Yet as we speak, we hear reports of Russian forces wielding sexual violence as a weapon of war. Sexual violence is a war crime, a crime against humanity, a tactic of torture, terror, and repression. Shameful acts in a shameful war. And this must be exposed to the light of day and prosecuted without impunity. And that's why we will host, together with UN Women, Dr. Mukwege Foundation and Nadia's initiative, a Southern Conference on Women in Conflict in just a few days in Brussels. I sincerely hope we can build momentum and step up our collective efforts to seriously address this critical issue.
So the accusation is that the Russians are using rape as a weapon of war, effectively. Well, what is the truth of this? I'm not going to comment on the Russian allegations in particular, but what Charles Michel is ignoring 100% is the documented evidence of rape as a weapon of war being used by the Ukrainian forces over the last number of years. So this is the report on human rights situation in Ukraine, 16th of February to the 15th of May, 2016. Let's choose a couple of paragraphs from this. 2 of the documented cases took place in or around Avdiivka in April and May 2015. A male detainee who was subject to torture and forced to confess to his involvement in the armed groups on camera. This is the Donetsk armed groups, or the Donbass armed groups rather, was subsequently threatened with sexual violence, told that he would be handcuffed and raped by a homosexual man. 2 women from the same family, aged 18 and 41, were tortured and repeatedly threatened with sexual violence. Other documented cases appear to be linked to the military presence. This is Ukrainian military presence in densely populated civilian areas, such as towns near the contact line, and general impunity. A man with a mental disability was subject to cruel treatment, rape, and other forms of sexual violence by 8 to 10 members of the Azov and Donbass battalions in August to September 2014. The victim's health subsequently deteriorated and he was hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital. On the 9th of December 2015, in Donetsk, a man was beaten and raped in Sizo number 5. He was taken outside for his daily walk, where he was confronted by a group of masked riot police who hit his legs and back twice with a baton and insulted him. Following the assault, the police stripped him down completely and forced him to bend over in front of them. He described standing naked in front of the camouflaged men in below 0 degrees Celsius temperature. The riot police mocked and insulted him and subjected him to a rectal examination. The victim named the perpetrators and believes he was subjected to such treatment in retaliation for applying to be transferred to government-controlled territory to serve the remainder of his sentence. And so it goes on. OSCE Supplementary Human Dimension meeting, April 2016, war crimes of the armed forces and security forces of Ukraine, torture and inhumane treatment. The captured women were frequently raped. In bold, here is what Yuri Novoltsev, one of the torture victims, says about Ukrainian soldiers from Western Ukraine beating up and raping a captured woman in the room next to the one where he was being held. One night I heard a woman who was being beaten cry. Those young soldiers, aged from 18 to 25, were speaking Ukrainian, but with the same accent as they have in Western Ukraine, meaning some of the words were Polish. Then these youngsters started insulting her. That is, they were raping her, beating her, and laughing like horses. That was not a laugh of a human being, meaning they were either high or drunk. They enjoyed beating and raping her very much. As to what exactly happened there, I learned later when that woman told me herself, just the things I heard were insulting for me as a person. So the point is, it has been documented that Ukrainians have been using rape as a weapon of war since the 2014 so-called revolution. And that has received no criticism from Charles Michel or the EU or the UK or the United States. So once again, we have absolute hypocrisy. And the question is, when this is documented, I would like to see similar documentation from the United Nations or the OSCE of any allegations against Russian servicemen in any of the activity that they have been involved in up to this point.
Yeah. Debi, as a woman, would you like to comment, because we're on some pretty serious subjects here, but the hypocrisy of the BBC and the EU is just breathtaking over this subject of who the bad guys are.
Whenever the BBC is mentioned, I can feel myself getting stressed. What I was pleased to see, and other people may have seen it as well, is that some news channels are very much coming out against the BBC now and speaking up about the propaganda and the misinformation that they're putting out. So I do think the message is getting out there, and more people need to be aware that the BBC is just it's lies. Everything that the BBC, I tend to think of opposite, and it's wicked because people still believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, and this is the danger of the sort of propaganda that they're putting out. Well, whilst those difficult subjects are not covered by the BBC, as I heard on Radio 4 yesterday, the BBC desperate to push out the idea that it's only those good people working in Ukraine for the very best of the poor, suppressed Ukrainian people. And this is the story that I heard narrated on Radio 4 yesterday. It's Ukrainian war. Why I risked my life to provide in Ukraine. Now, there's
aid in Ukraine.
Why I risked my life to provide, aid in Ukraine. I'm going to say absolutely no disrespect for the three young people that were interviewed, because clearly they've put themselves in a very dangerous position and in order to help people, and I'm going to take this at face value. What was nauseating was the fact that Radio 4 narrated coverage of this story, and I believe the lady doing it is an Irish reporter called Aria
Orla Gerlin.
Okay, thank you for that, Mike. And what was incredible was she delivered the story at a pace approximately suitable for a 3-year-old child. So I would really have to slow down my reports for people today in order to get over the wonderful work. It was that bad. So we had a story, we'll say 3 young people would take it at face value, they were genuine, they were there to help, but the BBC tried to dramatize this in a way which was truly appalling. So if you get an opportunity to have a listen to that Radio 4 report, please do.
Okay, a number of mainstream outlets reporting the fact that 2 captured Britons, Aidan Aslan and Sean Pinner, are appearing in, well, it's being described as a Russian separatist court. Of course, this is not a Russian anything court. This is a court which has been convened in the Donbass. So 2 Britons, they say, captured by Russian forces in Ukraine, have appeared in court in territory held by pro-Russian rebels. Aidan Aslan, 28, from Nottinghamshire, and Sean Pinner, 48, from Bedfordshire, are being held in the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. They're reportedly charged with being mercenaries, but their families say they were in the Ukraine military. It's feared that the court, which is not internationally recognized, could pass the death penalty if it convicts them. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, my thoughts are, how would people feel if there had been war on the scale that we see in Ukraine in England? We've described the fact that it's affected territory the size of England, and we had foreign mercenaries who'd come to England to kill people for payment, for receiving a payment. How would we wish to treat them? Would it be with love and kindness, or would people be saying, these people came into our country as foreigners, they were there to kill, therefore they must face the full force of the law? I think if we put it in those circumstances, Mike, everything changes. So we will see what happens with these. I think the only word we can describe is very silly young men who thought that they were going to go for some form of military holiday when they went to Ukraine, but ultimately they've discovered something far more serious is going on.
Well, while all the distraction of Boris's leadership was going on, Priti Patel was back in Parliament yesterday to push for this piece of legislation, the National Security Bill. And thanks to the people that have been talking about this, because this is a vital piece of legislation and we need to pay attention to it. So this is a government bill, and it was getting its second reading yesterday. It has passed that second reading. We'll show you an image of how many people were concerned about this, how many MPs were concerned about this in the House of Commons. So there they are, about 30 of them maybe at most. But this is a pretty horrible piece of legislation. It replaces parts of the Official Secrets Act, or it will do if it becomes, if it passes. And one of the things it will do is will create an offence to disclose leaked information that could prejudice what are called safety or interests of Britain, the safety or the interests of Britain. And so, for example, if this legislation had been in place, and bearing in mind that the emails which exposed the Integrity Initiative were leaked or hacked, whichever way it was, this would potentially make it illegal for a journalist to report those emails. Another part of the bill, well, if you remember, one of the recent pieces of legislation that we've been talking about was the Covert Intelligence Sources Act. It became an act which effectively made it legal for agents of various government agencies to commit illegal acts with permission of the UK government. Well, they are now part of this bill, will now allow foreign agents, so agents of the UK government that are operating in foreign countries, to commit illegal acts on behalf of the British government as well. So this is massively dangerous. It's dangerous for free speech. It's dangerous for what's going on in other countries. There's much more to it. There are police aspects to this. There are espionage aspects to it as one of these all-encompassing bills. But it very much puts journalists in particular at risk if a whistleblower comes with information to them, or if emails are handed to them from an anonymous source, for example.
And there's got to be only one reason why you want this type of legislation, and that is because you're getting very worried that your dirty deeds are likely to be exposed or are being exposed.
Well,
so I'll just add to we've seen the comments about Ukraine, but of course the UK government involved in torture over a great number of years. But of course, with the holier than thou attitude of the British government, we don't want to discuss that, but we want to point the finger at other countries. And woe betide anybody who exposes what's really happening in UK.
Well, indeed. Now, they're, of course, justifying this because it's all about creating new measures for law enforcement and intelligence agents to deter, detect, and disrupt the full range of modern-day state threats. So they're saying this is all about dealing with intervention or interference from foreign states, which, of course, in this case means Russia and China. That's the justification for it, but it's actually much worse than that. Okay, we'll cover this more in more detail in the coming days. If you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. You would be very welcome as a community member there, and that would help us out immensely, as would picking something up from the UK Column shop. But in any case, please do share our material on the various platforms. Delighted to say that this weekend we will be hosting once again a symposium held by the Doctors for COVID Ethics. You can see the speakers on screen there at the moment. They're going to be looking at mRNA vaccines, which they describe as a serious threat to mankind. They're looking at the history of crime and abuse in medicine, looking at the threat to sovereignty and democracy, the centralization of power, that's World Health Organization's treaties and so on. And then to finish off at the end of the day, they'll be live streaming Andrew Wakefield's latest film, Infertility. So that begins on June the 11th, that's this Saturday, and we'll have more details on that on Friday. So let's move on then to this. Chatham House, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, pushed this article out today, the militarization of Russian polar politics. So the polar region, very key area. And what are they saying here? Russia's politics for the polar regions overlap and are increasingly becoming militarized. And the first question is, why would Russia be militarizing the polar regions? Could it be anything to do with the fact that Britain, the United States, the EU are saying that as and have been pushing this narrative that it is a key strategic area for years now? So the Defence Arctic Strategy launched in 2018, and Gavin Williamson at the time, Russia with more submarines operating under the ice and ambitions to build over 100 facilities in the Arctic are staking a claim in militarizing the region. So the narrative of militarization actually has been going on for years. Then the Arctic Council took place in 2019, and you can see Sergei Lavrov was there, and so was Mike Pompeo. Was that a positive development? Well, not really, because Pompeo's language was like this: the Arctic has become an arena for power and for competition, and the 8 Arctic states must adapt to this new future. He said this is part of a very familiar pattern. Beijing attempts to develop critical infrastructure using Chinese money, Chinese companies, and Chinese workers, in some cases to establish a permanent Chinese security presence. He lied. And he goes on to say, and then there's Russia. Russia illegally insists other nations request permission to pass through the Northern Sea route along its coast, expressing territorial ambitions just as violently as it did in Ukraine. So that was in 2019. And then move on to 2020, and we've got Anne-Marie Trevelyan, the Defence Procurement Minister for the UK. The UK will not stand by if peace in the Arctic region is threatened. And then we've got all the various Arctic exercises, all the NATO exercises have been taking place over the last number of years. Almost every month there's another NATO exercise in the Arctic. Let's have a look at what Ben Wallace was saying. The Arctic is becoming an area of increasing military competition, and the security of the region is directly linked to our national security. Then we've got more exercises. Royal Marines carry out fjord recce mission in huge Arctic exercises with NATO allies. Then we had Ben Wallace heading over to Finland and Sweden to get NATO expanded nicely in the Arctic. Then we have the UK's defence contribution in the high north. The Arctic has historically been an area of low tension, and we wish it to remain so. Well, that's a lie, because we've just shown how much of a lie that is. However, melting sea ice in the Arctic brings threats as well as opportunities. Russia is taking an increasingly militarized approach to the region, and China is supporting its proposed Polar Silk Road with a range of infrastructure and capabilities that have dual-use potential. Dual-use potential, keep that in your mind. As the region becomes increasingly accessible, threats from everywhere around the globe could spill over to the Arctic. And then, Alex, a week or so ago, new commando forces lead Britain's military and Arctic operations. Then yesterday, we were talking about exercise ball tops in the Arctic once again. And today, we've got British and Finnish fighter jets conducting joint exercises in the Arctic. So, Brian, why would the Russians be concerned about this, and why would they be militarizing their position?
Well, because when one side takes an aggressive stance, you either try and ignore it, but you've got to counter it. What's in my head as I watch this lot is we've got the situation in Ukraine continuing. What is the West doing? The West is already on to the next stage of where can we militarize? So we're just told about threat after threat after threat. The militarization is the game. We're not looking at rebuilding the infrastructure of UK or dealing with or rebuilding industry or getting the economy going. We've got a political group running the country that seem to be focused on a war machine.
Absolutely.
I don't know how else you describe it.
So let's come back to this Chatham House report, and there's their nice graphic that goes with it. Well, let's see what they say. In the Arctic, Russia's main threat perception relates to the fear of encirclement by NATO and its allies. I wonder why. In the context of Russia's renewed war against Ukraine since February 2022, the Finnish and Swedish applications to join NATO and the likely expansion of the alliance are a case in point. In Antarctica, Russia's posture relates to protecting its national interests from territorial claims over the continent by other, so that they're even bringing the Antarctic into this as well. Now then, we've got Moscow views the Arctic as a strategic continuum stretching from the North Atlantic to the North Pacific. The Kremlin's priorities are to impose costs on other countries' access to Russia's European Arctic, protect the Northern Sea route, defend North Pole approaches, remove tensions from the region, and extend Russia's military capabilities beyond the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation. Do you have much of a problem with that, Brian?
Not in response to what we're actually seeing.
Yes.
Seeing UK and the West do. So, but it's a similar situation to what's caused the problem in Ukraine. The Russians eventually said, no, we are not going to accept this build-up, this military build-up, getting closer and closer to our borders. So it's happened in the East. We've now got it happening, the West doing the same trick, it would appear, in the Arctic.
Okay, so let's look at the last little clip from this. Russia is rebuilding its military capabilities and modernizing its regional military infrastructure by using a double dual approach. Arctic infrastructure is being used for civilian and military purposes, brackets dual use, while Russia is also blurring the lines between offensive and defensive intent. So let's consider this for a second. The accusation is that Russia is heading towards dual use and that it's blurring the lines between offensive and defensive. Well, let me tell you that this idea of dual use, this idea of civilian and military, this began with European defense 2015, here we are, European Defence Matters, Jens Stoltenberg and Federica Mogherini at the European Defence Agency, absolutely pushing this narrative of dual use and of the merging of civilian and military infrastructures, followed up by Rose Gottmaler, who's speaking in 2017, saying we need to break down the silos between military and civilian institutions. Then we've got Ben Wallace saying, I'm a soldier. I was always taught the best part of defence is offence. So it should come as no surprise then that the UK's integrated operating concept is offensive rather than defensive. And let's just remember what they said. The central idea of the integrated operating concept is to drive the conditions and tempo of strategic activity rather than responding to the actions of others. So that's saying we're going to go on the offensive. We're going to cause events to happen rather than wait for them to happen and react to them. So if we're accusing, or at least Chatham House is accusing Russia of doing the things that the UK, the EU and NATO are doing. And as for this dual use issue, let's come back to that for a second. Let's remember that the UK government brought this satellite company, OneWeb, out of bankruptcy. It's owned by the UK government effectively. It's launching these very low Earth orbit satellites, these clusters similar to Elon Musk's SpaceX clusters. And if we remember what Alok Sharma, who was the business secretary at the time in 2020, saying that this is great news because we're going to connect people worldwide by giving them internet access using these UK-backed broadband satellites, right? But in the meantime, Ben Wallace was saying, we'll ensure that we embed dual use at the heart of our capability management processes, right? So it just, I'm really struggling with this, Brian, because we constantly fire these accusations at Russia, accusing them of doing the things that we are doing. These are the policies that we are pursuing, and these are policies that are bringing the world to the brink of global conflict. But the accusations are fired out, and we're expected to not criticize that in any way. Or if we do criticize the actions of our own governments, then that means we're taking a pro-Russian position.
It is incredible, and there's some real passion in UK column news today because this situation is becoming untenable. The sheer hypocrisy of Boris Johnson's government and the fact that the warmongering is just coming to the surface is easily visible. Debi, you have watched a lot of the Ukrainian reports from the UK column, and I know that on occasions you felt that yes, this information needs to come out, but we also got other subjects to cover. I'm just going to say, when you see the sheer scale of the plans in UK, the US and NATO, which are all about war, they're not about developing economies, it seems to me that we have to stay very much focused on what this militarization of UK is all about. But what's your response?
Yeah, I agree. And, for me, Ukraine is the UK in June rain, and I tend to focus in on the Ukraine, on the UK. But, saying that, just speaking about Ben Wallace, wasn't he the chap that got pranked on that phone call and said that actually the UK was running out of any kind of military hardware to send to Ukraine? And everything seems to be blamed on Ukraine. The fuel shortages seem to be blamed on Ukraine. So I completely understand that this is all interlinked, and we absolutely have to keep our eyes on the ball, especially as the mainstream media seem to have dropped Ukraine completely almost from the news.
Well, with the serious reporting, because they're looking basically to see how they can rebrand it, so they know what they're going to be reporting when Ukraine finally loses. But the tragedy, of course, is it isn't Russia or Ukraine. It's the tragedy of all the people fighting and dying in that war, which the West could stop overnight if they simply said to Zelensky, we're not giving you any more weapons. You are going to sit down and negotiate with the Russians, and we'll support you in those negotiations. That would be a very different stance. But of course, the British government and the BBC wants the violence and wants the killing. Well, let's change subject. Debi, you've got an article which is up on the UK column. I believe that went up yesterday. When is enough enough? Do no harm. And in a complementary way, there's also an article by Ian Davis, which is entitled Alex Mitchell and His Fight for Vaccine-Induced Thrombocytopenia Sufferers. Hope I've pronounced that correctly. So Debbie, tell us about your article and any comments you got on Ian's article, if indeed you've had time to have a look at that.
Well, I confess I didn't know that Ian's article was up, so I haven't read it, but I'm sure, as always with all of Ian's articles, they are spot on, and I shall thoroughly enjoy reading it. My article was in response to Professor Munir Mohammed's response to me, and other people it would seem, with regards to serious adverse reactions. So rather than just email Professor Munir Mohammed back, I thought it would be more appropriate to write an article, and then hopefully other people might like to forward it to him, because he didn't answer any of my questions. His language in his reply is very suspicious, as you'll read, and I have a lot of questions for him. So if anybody wants to forward it on to Professor Mohammed, his email address is Munir, Munir, p@liverpool.ac.uk. So maybe we'll get some answers from him, but I find what he wrote in his letter to me shocking, offensive to every single person that's suffering from a serious adverse reaction. And he is the head honcho in pharmacovigilance. You know, he is the head man, and we really do need to be concentrating on getting him to answer our questions and to take responsibility and order an immediate investigation and stoppage of all medicines that seem to be causing so many serious adverse reactions immediately.
Okay, Debbie, thank you for that. And I'd just add that you have personally been doing so much work to challenge the authorities on what they're saying and what they say they're doing. And of course, what is needed is many people to also be challenging them. So if our viewers and listeners have a look at that article on the UK Column website and they agree with what you are essentially saying, then what do we think should be happening? We think that more people should be getting in contact and making their own comment and demanding answers. It's the numbers of people that have the power to change what's happening. Now, you wanted to get refocused back onto Spy B, which of course was mentioned quite frequently during the COVID-19 pandemic, since has dropped a little bit out of public sight. I'll just call up some of the people here. Well, first of all, Spy B, if you don't know, the Independent Scientific Pandemic Insights Group on Behaviours. Some very interesting people listed on this. And if you follow the list through, you then come to another group called Spy M. What are you picking up on bringing Spy B and Spy M back into the public view, Debbie?
Well, you know, despite what everybody says, it's not over. The behavioralists and the behavioral scientists are still at it. And I just wanted to highlight really mainly Spy B, because as you can see, Professor Susan Mickey, who I've spoken about a lot before, who heads the Spy B team, her husband, Professor Robert Weston, also on the Spy B team, and he's funded by Pfizer, cancer research, etc. But that's another story. But anyway, Susan Mickey, who has earned herself the formidable nickname of Stalin's nanny, she was spied on a train. And I think you might have got a slide of her on the train. Just let's remember that this is COVID guidance too, that's suddenly disappeared. It's all gone. So I'm not quite sure why we're seeing her on the train in a mask. And it's not just an ordinary mask. She seems to be very proud of it, but I don't think she got the memo that the government have actually withdrawn their COVID guidance. And now you only need to try to stay at home if you have COVID. There's no mandate on having to stay at home. So I'm not sure whether Susan got the message or not. So I couldn't resist but to tweet her back.
Masks. I'm pleased to wear mine to protect myself and others. I don't mind being in a tiny minority or even the only one, and I hope you don't mind, and I hope you don't either. We don't have to follow social norms. Is she actually following a social norm, Mike? Well, anyway, I don't know. So you tweeted back and said, I do object actually when dirty masks get swept into my garden by rain. I'm wondering where your logic comes from. Oh yes, we forget you're an expert in altruism and costly signalling, yawn. Well, that obviously hit hard, Debbie, because the response from the good professor was this, you're blocked. So how did you feel about that?
I kind of took it as a badge of honour, actually. I believe Susan Mickey has been blocking a lot of people. But I mean, it's hilarious. I mean, what does she think she's doing? FP3 mask. This isn't just a normal face covering. I mean, honestly, this is Stalin's nanny here. I mean, what? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I had to label this one The Eyes Had It because I did find those eyes rather penetrating. They didn't give me a warm, loving human feeling. But anyway, that was the eyes. We're not advertising those particular masks. We're just saying that it wasn't any old mask that she was wearing. She was into £5.80 worth, apparently, of non-valved FFP3 mask. So that's the real deal, apparently, if you want to keep viruses away. But a conservative woman who we've often covered because they've been pushing out some very good material. And we've got this one here, which you've mentioned. Stalin's nanny says we must be masked forever. It's not a mask she needs, but a gag. So we have to agree with that headline. And they are pointing out to the audience once again that we should perhaps pay attention to Professor Susan Mickey because of her membership of the Communist Party of Britain. Is she the right person to be advising the government from that basis alone? I'm not so sure.
No.
Right, well, concise answer, right.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, I'm keen to get on to some statistics about how the public views things, but just before we get there, tell us about this one, ICANN, legal update, COVID-19 vaccine manufacturers fail to properly investigate adverse events. And there's some reports that this organisation's pushed out.
Yeah, this is interesting because the manufacturers are saying, well, we're not getting the information about serious adverse reactions. So, but we know from speaking, I've spoken to many people who are suffering from serious adverse reactions who are sending the reports in direct to the manufacturers. However, it would appear that the manufacturers are making no attempt to find out about what's actually happening with serious adverse reactions because there have been no freedom of information submitted. So clearly they don't care. So we need to be aware, I think, more than anything, that they're obfuscating at every single door that we knock on. They're not interested and they're lying. Pharmaceutical companies, regulators, you name it, everybody is lying.
Okay, we got some comments here on this particular one, which is, we just read these out because it sets the scene. Unfortunately, as the experiences of many vaccine-injured individuals have proven, these companies do not appear to be adhering to their claims of taking adverse events to their products seriously. ICANN, however, does and will continue to hold those companies accountable. And the other comment that's been made there, which I think is an important one, it says, for those familiar with these companies' histories, the results will not be all that surprising. Based on the FDA's responses so far, 2 of the 3 vaccine manufacturers did not submit a single FOIA request to the FDA regarding reports of adverse events to their COVID-19 vaccines. But I suppose if we want to be pretty black and white about it, it's probably obvious that companies are not going to look for the problems with their own products if they're going to keep the shareholders happy. If they are truly going to look after people's health, of course they would. But are you going to dig the dirt if that's going to cause trouble with your shareholders? I don't think so.
Well, of course, you've got the other thing of the fact that they all expected these serious adverse reactions anyway. So we're
Right.
seeing it now with the Pfizer dump. We're seeing it with all of the manufacturers. They expected them. So if they expected them, they don't need to be told about them because they know they exist, but they just don't want to take responsibility, accountability for it. And as Albert Bourla clearly said to Klaus Schwab, the governments are the ones taking the risk, not us.
Yeah, and so we've got the companies do not know the safety of their own products and they don't want to find out. But we are going to push ahead with the vaccine program for young children. And you've picked up on this, well, it's a retweet by Neil Oliver. The original tweet is, "This is abhorrent. There is no moral or medical argument to justify this for any child, let alone 6-month-old babies. A civilization that uses their young as a shield for the elderly deserves to fail." And the headline that they've pushed through is from Daily Mail: Pfizer asks FDA to authorize its COVID-19 vaccine for children from 6 months to 4 years, and that was actually pushed out on the 2nd of June. So we haven't bottomed out safety of vaccines. We know this from the MHRA in UK, but we're going to push those vaccines out to ever younger children. That's the reality, Debbie.
It's absolutely wicked. I feel myself shaking. And as I've said many times on here, my golden rule and that of any ethical medical professional is that you never experiment on pregnant women, babies, children, young children, older children. You just don't do it. It's that simple. It's absolutely shocking. And we should all of us, be rising up against this tyranny and this absolute democide is what I'm going to call it.
Yeah. Okay, now this section really fascinates me. A few days ago, you said to me that you discovered some information that you thought was truly astonishing, because it was a set of statistics, it was data where people were taking a look at the public's reaction to the whole of this sort of COVID-19 so-called pandemic and the response. And the organization which had produced this data is called Parisia. I was fascinated by everything to do with it, particularly the logo, for people that find that sort of things interesting. We've also got involved the Policy Institute, King's College London. So this is part of a story that you've regularly talked about, which is whatever direction you go looking at vaccinations, you come back into this sort of golden triangle of the big British universities. But here's Parisia, and what is it doing? It's looking at public attitudes towards national governments and other institutions. I'll just bring up a little bit more and then I'll come back over to you for comment. Here's some of the young lovelies, and we've got to trust them because apparently they're going to all be scientists, I would imagine, Mike. Here's the organisation itself. It's an EU-funded project investigating public trust in expertise. Our multidisciplinary team seeks to help citizens and policymakers understand trust in science and identify trustworthy expertise. By doing so, we aim to enhance trust in a better democratic governance for the future of Europe.
This is really devious and dangerous, because of course we've already got the trust narrative in the media. Trust the BBC, trust the trust initiatives that are out there, trust the fact checkers, trust all these people, and then you don't have to think for yourself. We're bringing trust into medical practitioners, experts. So we've got the media on one hand trusted, and then we've got the experts on the other hand trusted, which the media will use, and we just trust them and we don't have to think.
Well, we can just sort of stay at home and just
go to sleep.
Go to sleep. But the other bit they talked about, of course, was that they're helping build a better democratic government system, and yet we've shown at the start of this news the fact that we haven't got a functioning democracy under Boris Johnson. We've got a cabal running the country. But let's follow it through. The project says it will use climate change and climate science as a test case, so that's important. I like this. This is part of their banner, untruths, trust in an age of disinformation.
Right.
Trust us, Parisia, because we're going to do the job. Let you comment on that. And the next slide I know that's coming up is one of the key people. But what caught your eye about this company?
Well, what caught my eye about it was, as you'll see, as we'll come on to see, was some of the language that they're using and some of the reports that they're bringing out and some of the people involved. And of course, as you've quite rightly mentioned, King's College are involved in this, and apparently it's an EU funded project, but we've already discussed that we long left the EU, didn't we? So we can see a close collaboration between the EU, but King's College, London, Oxford, Cambridge are the golden universities in the Golden Triangle. So, let's look a bit deeper at this organisation and their language and at what they're saying and who runs them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on the who runs them, we've only got a short amount of time, obviously, for the news, but this is one of the key people, Stefan Lewandowski, who's a professor of cognitive science at the University of Bristol. His research examines people's memory, decision making, and knowledge structures, with a particular emphasis on how people update their memories if information they believe turns out to be false. Okay, so this is a pretty serious person. Is he dealing in science, or is it partly science and partly psychology, Mike?
Well, what happens if you've got a media campaign which perhaps persuades people that they didn't quite remember something correctly? Is this part of what he's actually investigating here, to work out how to manipulate people's memories of the past?
Well, of course, one of the things is, if you approach this subject and produce research on it, presumably a good person could use it in the right way and a malicious person could use it for malicious purposes. So we can't label this particular gentleman, we probably shouldn't, but we can raise questions about the safety aspects of what he's doing. So in the little box there, if I can just read it, the print's quite small, but he says this has led him to examine the persistence of misinformation and spread of fake news in society, including conspiracy theories. He's become particularly interested in the variables that determine whether or not people accept scientific evidence, for example, surrounding vaccinations or climate change. So that's quite an easy, interesting angle there. But this is where you wanted to go, Debbie. This will be small, but we're going to say to people, you can freeze this on screen. Just give us an overview, if you can, of the sorts of things that they're pointing out in these tables. And also, you said to me, excuse me, Monday, I think it was, that the more you read of their own statistics, the more you excuse me, the more you felt it was actually demonstrating that life was not going entirely their way.
No, I found this very interesting. And, for viewers, have a look at their website, go and look at their studies and see what you think or how you interpret their studies, because I found the statistics very interesting. And it would just appear that we're all thinking, or at least many people maybe watching are thinking, that the British have been very compliant in the whole COVID agenda. And that's what we're being told, and that's what's being reported around the world. But it actually turns out, that us British, we are fighting against it, and we're not as compliant as they thought we were going to be. Italy were very compliant, but the UK were the second worst compliant country in Europe. And some of the statistics with regards to 5G, how many people were relating COVID and 5G, I felt those were very high statistics. How many people didn't trust the government? The screen's a little bit too small, but I think it was 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 didn't trust the government. So, on the flip side, I think, I question why we have the WEF, the WHA, Bilderberg, the G7 minister summit, all at once. And I'm just wondering, actually, if they're the other side, as it were struggling, and maybe things aren't going quite as well as they thought, and maybe we're being told that the British were very, very good and very altruistic and very compliant. But according to that, however you choose to interpret it, to me, it would appear we're not as compliant, and maybe we should be giving ourselves a little bit more credit and patting ourselves on the back.
Right, so we can see some evidence to say that somebody somewhere has called for this organisation to do the studies that they've done, because somebody is a bit worried that we haven't taken on board all of the policies and procedures and things that we've been told in quite the way that they originally thought. That's your key point, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, why do the study if there's no reason to? Somebody's flagged up something somewhere, and this isn't, there are a number of studies on this website. So somebody's commissioning them for a reason. Why would you commission them if there wasn't some concern around it?
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. And I'll say we've only given an overview of those statistics today, but what we will do in future news programs is pull out some of the detail and make sure we can have a look at the actual figures on screen, and then we can discuss that in a bit more detail. But of course, from a point of common sense, you've been highlighting for a long time that the organisation with responsibility for safety to do with all things to do with pharmaceutical products and vaccines, the MHRA, has simply not been doing its job. And you've pulled in on this one here, an MHRA board meeting, um, Tuesday, the 21st of June. Patient safety is mentioned. What's been going on here?
Wow. Please do invite everybody to that's the next MHRA board meeting. I'm very glad to say that I have applied for tickets and I'm successfully on the next MHRA board meeting on the 21st of June. Please share the link. They need to know that we're watching them. Patient safety is on the agenda, so if anybody's got questions, I would suggest to submit them to MHRA. Not that MHRA are getting back to me at all. And I've had my complaint in, an official complaint, for over 40 days now. They're meant to respond to me within 18 working days. So clearly the MHRA pretty much have shut down on everybody. So what I'm just bringing attention to is that their next board meeting to be held in public is open to members of the public to apply to. So that's the link if anybody wants to join me on Zoom.
Okay, and what's the latest with regard to the MHRA board meetings? Because a little while ago it was obvious that after you had challenged them on what was being said in some of the board meetings, and UK Column had drawn a lot of people's attention to the fact that they could watch the MHRA board meetings on YouTube. All of a sudden it appeared the MHRA stopped posting their board meetings on YouTube. Have they now reverted to making it fully public, Debbie, or are they still working in the dark or working in the weeds because too many people are watching what they're doing?
So my hunch is, bearing in mind that the MHRA have been broadcasting their board meetings for the last nearly 2 years now, religiously every single month. The last board meeting that they published on YouTube was February. As far as I'm aware, I haven't checked today, but I don't believe that the written minutes for the February board meeting have been put up, despite the MHRA telling me they would be. The March board meeting, if you remember, was cancelled after I applied for tickets and was held in private. And then there was an April board meeting to which I applied for, and I got on and I asked questions. I'm still waiting for an answer to those questions for the April board meeting. There was no May board meeting, so I'm presuming that they're having these meetings now behind closed doors and just selecting a few to hold in public. So my guess is there's an awful lot going on behind closed doors that we don't know about, but clearly the MHRA are busy regulating all sorts of new different drugs that are coming down the line, and they're not interested in talking about serious adverse reactions. So if anybody wants to email June Rain direct, her direct email is june.rain with an E on the end at mhra.gov.uk, because these people simply have to have pressure kept on them. And, we will be exploring viewers' emails coming up, hopefully tomorrow. And many of our viewers are writing to the MHRA, to June Rain, and to the Commission for Human Medicines. And for that, I am super, super grateful, because as you've always said, both of you, Mike and Brian, we have to keep the pressure up, all of us. It's not just any good me sending emails off, everyone needs to do it.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, now we've got an eye on the clock. We're going to finish in just a couple of minutes, but you picked up with regard to the MHRA on the crucial difference between efficacy and effectiveness. And people freeze this screen. There's a link through to a YouTube video where it appears the lovely June Rain is discussing this aspect in relation to yellow card. I've got a slide talking about the definition of efficacy and effectiveness. But what caught your attention, and why is this difference so important?
Well, this is a very important slide for two reasons, and there is another slide on efficacy and effectiveness, because June Rain makes it very clear at 2 minutes in that video that she would be told off if she confused efficacy and effectiveness. Efficacy is to do with what happens on the clinical trial. There you go. I think you've got it there. I can't quite read it, Brian, so you might just want to read it out for me, just to
It says
be clear.
efficacy is the degree to which a vaccine prevents disease and possibly also transmission under ideal and controlled circumstances, comparing a vaccinated group with a placebo group. Effectiveness, meanwhile, refers to how well it performs in the real world. Although a vaccine has high efficacy, such as Moderna, so on, then it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be effective, is basically what that says.
Right, so by choosing which word they use at which particular time, the MHRA can quietly manipulate or even deceive the public in their belief as to what's happening.
100%. I mean, as you can see from that, efficacy is what's happened on a clinical trial. Effectiveness is what's happening in the real-time population. So when we say if the vaccine's effective, well, clearly it's not. If we say that under the clinical trials it appeared to show efficacy, that's where they can get away with the nuancing of language. And that is a really big, important difference in pharmacological terminology. Those two words mean a completely different thing.
Yeah, okay. Debbie, thank you very much for that. I know you've got a lot of other material which you're going to be sharing with our audience over the coming UK column newses, and we've also got tomorrow, of course. But we'll get on to that, and we'll be having a look at why the establishment seems to be convinced there's another pandemic coming, and why, of course, out of the blue, everybody seems to be able to talk about only monkeypox, but we'll save that for another time. Debbie, thank you for that. Well, we're going to end there, so we'll say to our audience today, thank you very much for joining us. A very big thank you to everybody who has sent us emails of support, and especially to those people who are now taking out subscriptions with us. We can only do what we do with your financial support. So if you're not a subscriber to UK Column, please consider doing that. And we're going to say, as this serious world situation continues to play out, we're going to continue to do our best to analyse it and explain what we think the real truth is. Often very different story to the British government. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for joining us. Extra time, Mike. There will be an extra time in a few moments if you're signed in with us as a member. Thanks very much. We'll see you there. Bye-bye.